It looks like remains.
For 4 years, the case of Summer Wells has been nothing but silence. No trace, no confession, no body. But that changed when divers returned to Fort Patrick Henry Lake. Beneath the murky water, they found a rusted barrel, a white blanket tangled in rocks, and a human-shaped figure resting on the lake bed. At first, it was dismissed as shadows and debris. Now, after a new 2025 tip led investigators back to the same exact coordinates, the question can no longer be ignored. What if the outline they saw wasn't just a shape, but someone? And could that figure beneath the lake be the remains of 5-year-old Summer Wells? On the afternoon of June 15, 2021, 5-year-old Summer Moon Utah Wells vanished from her family's home on Ben Hill Road in Beach Creek, Tennessee. The disappearance sparked one of the largest manhunts in the state's history. Within hours, an AMBER alert echoed across Tennessee, helicopters hovered above the dense Appalachian woods, and search dogs traced the ground for days. Yet, despite thousands of man-hours, thermal imaging, and specialized teams, there was nothing. No footprints. No trail. No sound. Just the eerie stillness of a summer evening interrupted by a missing child. As days turned into weeks, the community of Hawkins County watched the case spiral from urgency to uncertainty. Rumors filled the silence. Theories about strangers, family tension, and tragic accidents, but none of them fit cleanly. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation confirmed only one thing: there was no trace of Summer Wells anywhere. By the time 2024 arrived, the search had slowed to a whisper. The posters faded. The trail went cold. But while the official search stopped, the internet refused to forget. In the corners of Reddit threads, YouTube channels, and Facebook groups, digital detectives kept digging. Among them were 3 independent content creators, Exploring with Nug, Ryan Finds Truth, and Adam Brown Adventures, divers known for uncovering vehicles, evidence, and even missing persons in lakes across the country. Unlike many who speculated from behind screens, they decided to go where few had gone before, under the surface of Fort Patrick Henry Lake. The choice of location wasn't random. The lake lies just a few miles from the Wells' home, part of a winding system of rivers and coves where heavy debris and forgotten objects sink into obscurity. It's a place both beautiful and haunting: steep cliffs blanketed in moss, green water that turns black just a few feet below the surface. Local fishermen had long said that once something falls into that lake, it's gone forever. In the summer of 2024, the divers launched their small boat from a narrow ramp and began scanning the area with sonar. What they saw was enough to make them stop recording for a moment. The monitor showed a cylindrical shape resting upright on the lake bed, surrounded by smaller irregular forms. At first, it could have been a rock formation, until one of the divers noticed the distinct outline of a barrel, partially buried in silt. They descended. The water was cold and thick with algae. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. As their flashlights cut through the murk, something pale caught the beam, a white blanket wedged between stones, moving slightly with the current. Next to it, a piece of fabric, possibly a shirt, clung to a cluster of submerged branches. And then, beyond that, a shape. It looked like a body. One diver later said in the video, his voice shaking slightly.
I saw the shape of the body and what appears to be a body. I mean, everything, the curves, it's a little more curvy than a rock's around it.
You can't unsee it once you see it. The curve, the shoulders, even the roundness of the head, it wasn't random. It was shaped like a person. For a moment, they hovered there, unsure whether to approach. The camera footage shows the light flickering over a form that seems almost human, lying still, pressed against the side of a rock ledge. The diver reaches out, but sediment clouds the view, erasing the image in seconds. When they surfaced, both agreed, whatever it was, it didn't look natural. Back on the boat, they examined what else they'd found. The rusted barrel appeared ancient, corroded along the seams as if something once filled it. Inside was only black water and residue. The white fabric, when lifted, revealed nothing beneath but sand and stone. Still, the divers couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something more than discarded junk. They returned several times that month, each time mapping a bit more of the lake's bottom. The coordinates, just a few miles downstream from Beach Creek, placed the site within the same radius where early search teams had focused in 2021. Yet no official report, had ever mentioned a full underwater sweep of Fort Patrick Henry. That detail alone reignited online debate. When the footage was uploaded, the internet exploded. Forums lit up with frame-by-frame analyses, viewers enhancing the stills, tracing the outline that resembled a body, comparing the texture of the blanket to photos of Summer's clothes. Some called it coincidence. Others said it was the clue authorities had missed for 3 years. And then, almost a year later, a new development changed everything. In mid-2025, a private investigator, following an anonymous tip, contacted the divers and confirmed that the same coordinates appeared in a lead he had received through unofficial channels. The tip suggested that a large container had been dumped in that area around the time Summer disappeared. The claim was never verified publicly, but it was enough to pull the divers back to the lake. This time, they brought updated sonar and underwater drones. The readings showed something even more curious. The barrel they'd once lifted was still there, now half buried in mud, and beside it, a faint depression shaped like a small body. Some said it could be erosion. Others weren't so sure. What made this discovery unsettling wasn't just what they found, it was where they found it. The site sits less than 2 miles from the path leading out of the Wells property, near an access point used by local workers. For investigators who understand behavioral patterns, this proximity means something. Criminals rarely travel far to dispose of evidence. They rely on familiarity, convenience, and the belief that what's close to home will draw the least suspicion. As word of the renewed search spread, theories reignited. Could Summer have accidentally fallen into the lake, her body trapped by debris? Or was something deliberately placed there, an attempt to bury the truth in plain sight? The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has never confirmed any discovery at Fort Patrick Henry Lake. Yet the silence itself speaks volumes. When asked if the area had been cleared, officials simply stated that all leads have been explored. But to many watching from home, that answer felt incomplete. If 2 separate groups, one civilian, one investigative, were drawn back to the exact same patch of water years apart, was that really coincidence? Or was it a sign of something unresolved? The divers' footage remains one of the most discussed pieces of citizen evidence in the Summer Wells case. Every frame has been analyzed, every shadow debated. Some see only rocks and debris. Others see the faint outline of a truth too heavy to float. Fort Patrick Henry Lake has become more than a geographic location. It's a symbol of what remains hidden, both literally and emotionally. Beneath its surface may not only rest discarded metal and forgotten trash, but also the weight of unanswered questions. And so, 4 years after that summer day in 2021, a single haunting question lingers. If the real clue was never in the woods, but under the water just miles from her home, then what exactly lies at the bottom of that lake? The footage was only the beginning. To understand what truly happened beneath Fort Patrick Henry Lake, we have to stop watching the surface and start examining the details hidden below it. What exactly did they uncover down there, and what does it mean? The discoveries beneath Fort Patrick Henry Lake form a strange and silent collection, fragments that, on their own, mean nothing, but together build a map of unease. When the divers surfaced with video and descriptions of what they had seen, their findings divided viewers into 2 groups: those who saw coincidence and those who saw evidence. The first and most striking element was the rusted barrel. To an untrained eye, it's a common object. Lakes are full of debris, fishing equipment, old appliances, and forgotten waste. But what made this barrel different was its position and its condition. It stood upright, partially embedded in the silt, as if it had been placed rather than drifted. The corrosion ran unevenly, the outside heavily eaten away, the inner rim darker and smoother, suggesting that at one time it had held something that reacted with the metal from the inside out. In forensics, that detail matters. A container left empty underwater will corrode evenly. A container that once held organic material, fluids, or sealed contents corrodes from within, forming a thin layer of residue that looks almost oily. The divers described seeing this residue glinting faintly under their lights. The lake's currents are mild, meaning that a barrel of that size and weight would not have rolled naturally to the point where it was found. For it to remain upright and lodged against the base of a cliff, it must have been deliberately released in a controlled spot, likely from a boat or from the steep ledge above. This realization unsettled many who reviewed the footage. It implies intention, and in an investigation defined by absence, intention is the one thing that cannot be ignored. Near the barrel lay a white blanket, tangled between stones and almost fused with algae. The material appeared thicker than common fabric, closer to a bedsheet or tarp, its edges caught under rocks as though someone had pressed it down to keep it from floating. Water naturally moves lighter items across the surface, yet this piece had remained pinned in the same position for months, perhaps years. Divers who frequent the region say such positioning rarely occurs by chance. When an object becomes anchored in this way, it either drifted into a narrow crevice and was trapped, or it was physically placed there. The latter raises troubling implications. Just a few feet away, the divers recovered a white shirt, discolored by silt but still visibly cotton. The footage shows it sliding through their hands underwater, its fabric brittle from decay. The color caught attention because of its resemblance to the description of what Summer was last seen wearing: a light top. It's crucial to note that this does not confirm anything. White is the most common color for clothing. Yet, in contextual analysis, even a common object can shift meaning when found near others that fit a consistent narrative. When a blanket, a barrel, and a shirt all surface within the same radius, coincidence starts to feel deliberate. A few days later, during an additional scan, one diver spotted what looked like the handle of a shovel half buried in sediment. At first, it was dismissed as a branch, but closer inspection revealed a metal blade at the end, corroded yet intact. Its presence in such depth was puzzling. The area has no nearby construction or recreational sites, and the path to the lake is too steep for casual dumping. The shovel could have drifted downstream during flooding, but the rest of the lakebed was largely clear of similar debris. That isolation gives it significance, not as a weapon, but as a possible tool. And then there is the most debated image, a human-shaped depression in the mud beside the rock wall. The diver's words, "Once you see it, you can't unsee it," became a refrain repeated in every online discussion. The contour they described had rounded shoulders, a faint curve where the torso would narrow, and a darker patch near the base that resembled a head resting sideways. Mud shifts, light distorts, and optical illusions underwater are common. Still, the formation's symmetry troubled even skeptics. A natural collapse of sediment tends to scatter irregularly. This one, however, mirrored the proportions of a small human body. From an investigative perspective, each of these elements can be rationalized individually. A barrel can be trash. A blanket can drift. A shirt can be lost property. A shovel can wash away from somewhere upstream. A depression can form from rockfall. But taken together, they form what analysts call a suspicious chain of correlation, a sequence of unrelated findings that converge spatially and contextually in a way that suggests purpose. In underwater recovery cases, such clusters often precede the discovery of actual evidence. The physical environment of Fort Patrick, Henry Lake enhances this theory. Because the water is murky and layered with algae, sunlight rarely reaches the bottom. Temperature drops sharply below 10 feet, preserving organic matter longer than on land. Silt accumulation acts like a slow burial process. Within a year, an object can sink several inches beneath the surface. This natural concealment means that by the time any official search returns, the landscape has already rewritten itself. What was once visible becomes hidden again, and what was hidden may never reappear. In that sense, every dive is a confrontation with time. The divers who filmed those anomalies may not have realized it, but they were capturing a frozen moment, a scene locked between decay and discovery. The question that investigators must now ask is whether these artifacts existed independently, or whether they are fragments of a single event that occurred on or around June 15, 2021. The logic connecting these finds to the Wells case rests not on direct proof, but on behavioral probability. Studies in environmental criminology show that, when evidence is concealed in water, it is almost always within a limited range of the offender's residence or workplace. Water provides both a psychological and practical barrier. It feels definitive, final. Once something sinks, it ceases to exist in the visible world. For someone seeking to hide the consequences of an act, intentional or accidental, water represents a form of erasure that seems safe. The Holston River, feeding into this lake, amplifies that possibility. It weaves behind rural properties, under bridges, and through isolated hollows. In summer, the current barely moves. In winter, storms churn the mud and shift debris along its path. If an object or body entered the water upstream, it could drift until weight and friction brought it to rest against the cliffs where the barrel was found. The diver's coordinates match precisely with a bend in the river known for collecting heavy debris. It is a natural trap, a place where the current slows just enough for things to settle. One forensic hydrologist reviewing the footage noted that the surrounding pattern of rocks near the depression indicated a minor landslide, possibly triggered by flooding. Such movement could easily cover remains or objects, sealing them under layers of sediment. This means that even if investigators returned now with high-resolution sonar, they might find only partial echoes, the lake's version of a ghost imprint. Beyond the physical evidence, there is the context of behavior. Online critics often ask why, if something truly significant lies there, no official recovery has taken place. The answer may lie in jurisdiction and risk. Underwater searches require permission from both environmental and law enforcement agencies. Without direct evidence of criminal activity, authorization is rarely granted. Civilian divers can explore and record, but they cannot excavate. That leaves a gap, a space between discovery and validation, where truth lingers unseen. This vacuum breeds speculation, but it also reveals how certain patterns repeat. In multiple cold cases across the country, unverified underwater footage later proved to align with genuine crime scenes once technology advanced. The footage from Fort Patrick Henry has that same uneasy quality, imperfect, grainy, but carrying a logic that refuses to disappear. It's not proof, but it's a direction. Critics of the theory argue that lakes accumulate mystery by their very nature. Over decades, they become time capsules of discarded history, lost equipment, dumped furniture, forgotten machines. Yet the key difference here lies in proximity and timing. These items weren't found in an industrial section or near a public dock. They were discovered near an undeveloped shoreline, within the radius of the original search, and consistent with the timeline of Summer's disappearance. That alignment is difficult to ignore. If the barrel was indeed placed intentionally, then its position, upright and pressed against the wall, indicates planning. If the blanket was anchored, it suggests an attempt to secure or hide. If the shovel and the shirt came from the same period, they could mark the residue of hurried movement. None of this proves guilt, but together they outline a scene of human interference. Nature alone rarely arranges chaos so neatly. To understand what might have happened beneath that water, one must also understand how silence operates in an investigation like this. The longer a case remains unsolved, the more every discovery is weighed against the fear of being wrong. Officials must guard against false hope. Citizens must interpret fragments without full context. Between these two extremes, a truth can drown. The footage of the barrel and the shape below it occupies that space, too uncertain to close the case, too compelling to forget. Every item retrieved from the lake remains unclaimed. No agency has identified them as evidence, yet no one can explain their presence either. The white fabric now sits in a storage bin, sealed to preserve it from contamination. The shovel rusts in a private collection of found objects. The barrel lies back where it was first seen, its surface splitting further each year. Only the depression, that human-shaped void in the mud, resists confirmation. Cameras can no longer find it, as if the lake itself decided to protect whatever secret it holds. For those following the case, this raises one inevitable question. What if that shape wasn't formed by erosion at all, but by a body that was once there and later released, carried silently into deeper water, or consumed by time? The possibility is horrifying, yet it fits the environment's nature. Fort Patrick Henry Lake has a way of absorbing evidence, turning solid things into memory. Whether those traces belong to Summer Wells or to another forgotten story remains uncertain. But what is certain is that they exist, immutable, silent witnesses resting in silt. For now, the lake keeps its answers. Yet the alignment of geography, evidence, and behavior suggests that what lies beneath is not coincidence. It's the echo of something deliberately hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to pull it back into the light. Every criminal act begins with a decision. Before the act, there is a calculation: where to go, how to hide, and what will ensure silence the longest. In behavioral criminology, location is never random. It's an extension of the offender's mind. The body may move through geography, but the crime moves through psychology. When viewed through that lens, the lake ceases to be just a setting. It becomes a statement. Water is the perfect accomplice to fear. It conceals, corrodes, and confuses. In thousands of investigations, it has served the same role: to slow decomposition, erase scent, and bury evidence beneath an ever-changing surface. A body in the woods leaves a trail. A body in water leaves nothing but questions. That is why water is often chosen not out of convenience, but out of certainty. It promises silence. It promises disappearance. Forensic studies consistently show that submersion significantly delays biological decay. Within days, tissues begin to take on the properties of their environment: minerals from the water, silt from the bottom, until the body no longer looks human. When that process occurs in a lake like Fort Patrick Henry, rich with algae and low oxygen, the transformation is faster, the evidence weaker, the scent undetectable to tracking dogs. Even trained cadaver canines struggle when the depth exceeds a few feet, because scent particles disperse in unpredictable currents. For someone familiar with these waters, that fact alone would make the lake a logical choice. The physical characteristics of Fort Patrick Henry amplify its potential as a hiding ground. The slopes are steep, the rocks slippery, and the sediment thick. Once something sinks, it embeds. The moss-covered cliffs form natural shelves where heavier objects can rest without sliding further. Over time, these shelves collect leaves, clay, and organic debris, forming what divers call natural graves. In other words, the environment itself does the work of concealment. No one needs to dig, no one needs to bury, nature buries for you. Behaviorally, that choice fits a recurring psychological pattern known as familiar concealment. Offenders rarely travel to unknown places. They rely on locations that offer both emotional familiarity and perceived safety. They convince themselves that proximity means control. The closer a hiding spot is to their daily routine, the easier it is to rationalize returning there if needed. It's paradoxical. People hide evidence in the very places that connect them to the act, believing that familiarity protects them from suspicion. For someone living in Beech Creek, Fort Patrick Henry and the Holston River would not appear as foreign or dangerous spaces. They're part of the landscape, places for fishing, work routes, and weekend drives. That comfort makes them ideal for hiding in plain sight. To an outsider, a lake is ominous. To a local, it's ordinary. And ordinary places draw the least attention. This concept, hide in plain sight, appears repeatedly across case studies. In one instance from Georgia, a missing woman was found less than half a mile from her home, submerged in a farm pond that police had initially ruled out because it was too visible. In another, in Missouri, a suspect returned daily to a reservoir where he had disposed of incriminating items, helping search teams without realizing the irony. Familiarity doesn't only guide behavior, it blinds it. When we apply that pattern to Fort Patrick Henry, a chilling logic unfolds. The lake sits within what investigators term the comfort radius, the distance an offender is statistically most likely to choose when concealing a victim or object. That radius often measures between 1 and 5 miles from the point of contact. Fort Patrick Henry lies squarely within that range. It's close enough to reach quickly, remote enough to evade witnesses, and large enough to swallow anything small without notice. But proximity alone isn't what makes the location significant. It's the method of disposal suggested by the objects found. The barrel discovered by divers fits a pattern seen in multiple historical cases. Using a container serves both functional and psychological purposes. Functionally, it prevents a body from floating due to trapped gases. Psychologically, it creates a sense of control and separation. The offender can tell themselves they've contained the act. In crime analysis, this is often referred to as the container method. Cases like the West Mesa barrel case and the Lake Mead discoveries have demonstrated how this technique endures across decades. In those examples, The motive wasn't necessarily sophistication, it was fear of exposure. Metal barrels are easily obtained, heavy enough to sink, and large enough to hold a small body. Once sealed and submerged, they are almost impossible to detect without targeted sonar. The barrel found in Fort Patrick Henry may or may not have served such a purpose, but its characteristics mirror that pattern: upright placement, corrosion from the inside, and isolation from surrounding debris. That combination, seen through behavioral logic, indicates deliberate action rather than accident. The same logic applies to the presence of the blanket and shovel. In behavioral profiling, such items are considered secondary evidence, objects that indirectly confirm preparation or aftermath. A blanket can conceal, wrap, or transport. A shovel implies physical effort or intent to bury, even if only symbolically. Both suggest that what occurred was not spontaneous but planned, even if that planning happened in panic. Water also serves another psychological function. It gives the illusion of absolution. To those burdened by guilt or fear, water represents cleansing and finality. It hides, but it also erases. Throwing something into a lake is not just about removal, it's about the hope that the act will sink along with it. That mindset aligns with offenders who struggle with remorse but seek practical escape. They don't destroy evidence, they distance it, allowing the environment to finish what they started. Within this framework, Fort Patrick Henry becomes not just a body of water, but a mirror to intent. Its accessibility, depth, and symbolic power all converge into the ideal stage for concealment. From the perspective of an investigator reconstructing choices, every aspect fits: the short travel distance, the secluded access point, the weight of the objects, the calm current. It's as if the geography was designed to enable the act. Another element worth considering is the illusion of completeness that water creates in an investigation. When agencies declare a body of water searched, the public assumes it's been fully examined. In reality, most searches cover only fragments. Standard underwater sweeps rely on linear sonar scans and diver grids that leave large blind zones. Without three-dimensional mapping, vast sections of the lake remain untouched. This is especially true for Fort Patrick Henry, where depth and underwater cliffs make comprehensive coverage nearly impossible. That technical limitation could easily lead authorities to believe the lake was clear when, in fact, large sections remain unexplored. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has stated that all lakes and waterways in the vicinity were searched early in the case, yet they never specified which sections or how thoroughly. It's entirely plausible that smaller tributaries and hidden coves were excluded due to terrain or time. Civilian divers later focused precisely on those neglected areas, the same places that sonar grids rarely reach. This overlap between omission and discovery forms the backbone of the underwater hypothesis. The very gaps left by official searches may be the spaces where truth still hides. Behavioral profiling adds one final layer to this reasoning. Offenders often revisit the area of disposal. It's not always out of guilt, sometimes it's reassurance. They return to ensure nothing has surfaced, to check that nature has kept its promise. This recurring proximity can explain why certain individuals maintain routines that pass near the same lake, even years after the disappearance. Familiar routes provide comfort, but they can also betray unconscious attachment to the scene of concealment. Taken together, the geography, psychology, and evidence align into a coherent behavioral map. If we strip away names and emotions, what remains is a universal pattern repeated across countless cold cases: a disappearance close to home, a location of water within the comfort radius, a sequence of objects consistent with controlled disposal, an incomplete official search leaving space for civilian discovery. That combination doesn't prove guilt or reveal a culprit, but it outlines intent, the silent logic behind the act. Fort Patrick Henry Lake fits every criterion of that logic. Its still waters hide not just physical weight, but behavioral truth. Perhaps that is why, even after years of silence, people continue to return to it, divers, investigators, and strangers alike. Not because they expect to find a miracle, but because something about that lake feels unresolved. Every current, every rock, every submerged artifact whispers the same unspoken question: was this where it ended? When the evidence of intent aligns so perfectly with environment, coincidence begins to dissolve. What's left is motive, quiet, calculated, and buried beneath the surface. And in cases like this, motive is often the first thing that resurfaces. They surfaced with footage and questions, but surfacing a video is not the same as surfacing evidence. Before any agency can declare a find as decisive, a long list of legal, technical, and practical hurdles must be cleared. That gulf between what civilians record and what investigators can certify explains much of the silence. Official pushback is straightforward and predictable. A barrel is trash until proven otherwise. A shirt is lost property until matched by forensics. A blanket is debris until chain of custody is established. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has remained cautious for that reason. Agencies are legally and ethically constrained. Taking items from a public lake, excavating silt, or exhuming a suspected human imprint requires probable cause, environmental permits, and a plan that preserves evidence for court. Acting on ambiguous, crowd-sourced footage risks contaminating a scene, destroying whatever proof might exist, and ultimately jeopardizing the ability to prosecute if a suspect were ever found. In short, a rush to judgment can ruin a case just as surely as a missed discovery. Those procedural limits matter, but they are not an argument that nothing is there. Consider the statistical patterns. Regional studies and case compilations show that the majority of recovered remains in rural, wooded counties are discovered within a small radius of the victim's last known location. The user-supplied statistic, 68% within 3 miles, 30% in or near water, is illustrative rather than definitive, but it captures a widely observed phenomenon. Offenders dispose close to home or to familiar routes. Likewise, improvements in underwater survey technology have repeatedly yielded breakthroughs in cold cases after years of nothing. Side scan and multi-beam sonar, ROVs with manipulator arms, and high-resolution photogrammetry have turned previously unreadable lakebeds into 3-dimensional maps. Each technological advance has resurrected scenes that earlier searches had missed. That contrast between what earlier tools could do and what today's tools reveal undercuts official complacency. Saying, "We searched all waterways," without detailing methods, grid density, or equipment is not the same as demonstrating a thorough, modern sweep. Many lake searches in the early 2020s relied on linear diver grids and single-beam sonar arcs that left gaps near steep drop-offs and behind submerged ledges. Sediment can quickly hide evidence. A small object can be buried under half a meter of silt within a few seasons, and organic material melds into the substrate, reducing sonar return contrast. Conventional sonar often reads heavy silt as background, and divers can miss depressions that match body shape if the angle of light and current haze obscure contours. In short, an absence of earlier detection is as much a function of method as it is of reality. Another complication is the difference between finding an anomaly and proving it to be human remains. Forensics requires a chain of custody that begins the moment an item is recognized as evidence. When civilians recover something from a lake, it is immediately subject to contamination, fingerprints compromised, biological traces degraded, contextual positioning altered. Agencies often refuse to accept items recovered by non-professionals unless strict documentation exists proving where and how the object was taken. That reluctance preserves judicial integrity but frustrates families and online communities who watched seemingly clear footage and expected immediate action. Environmental and jurisdictional constraints are real too. Underwater excavation is not simply a matter of dropping in divers with shovels. It can require coordination with environmental protection authorities, permits to disturb a water body, and assessments of habitat impact. In many jurisdictions, removing or disturbing sediment without authorization is illegal. Additionally, lakebeds may contain hazardous materials. Disturbing them can release contaminants or cause structural shifts that endanger divers. Agencies must weigh these risks before committing resources, especially on leads that remain circumstantial. Then there is the political and resource reality. Law enforcement agencies operate under budgets and staffing limits. High-profile cases do get prioritized, but they also attract scrutiny. Deploying expensive sonar arrays and specialist teams for an uncertain lead carries both financial and reputational risk. If a costly operation yields nothing, critics will ask why resources were diverted. If it yields ambiguous results, Civil suits and procedural challenges may follow. This creates a disincentive for immediate, exhaustive underwater excavation based on civilian footage alone. Still, the absence of an official confirmation does not negate the probability arithmetic that points to the lake. Cases that lay dormant for years have been solved when new tips match locations identified by independent searchers. Often the civilian footage functions like a spotlight. It focuses attention on a small area that official sweeps may have skimmed. The critical step is converting that focus into verifiable evidence under controlled conditions. That means returning to the site with documented search plans, multimodal sonar, and environmental clearance, mapping the area in 3 dimensions, and, if warranted, using controlled excavation or RAW-V recovery to retrieve materials with full chain of custody protocols. There is also the matter of seasonal windows. Lakes reveal different faces throughout the year. Drought can lower levels and expose shallows. Storms can shift silt and reveal previously buried objects. Ice melt can rear up things trapped under surfaces. Many cold case recoveries happen precisely at such moments, when nature briefly undid its concealment. For Fort Patrick Henry, timing could be everything. A targeted rescan in a low water period, coordinated with modern sonar sweeps, would produce different results than a summer's quick dive. Counterarguments will persist. Coincidence explains clusters of debris. Natural landslides can mimic human-shaped depressions. Private recoveries might alter context. These are valid cautions, and any robust investigation must entertain them. But caution is not the same as closure. Without transparent documentation of what was and wasn't searched, complete sonar logs, dive grid coordinates, and methodological disclosures, the public and private searches remain partly parallel narratives rather than a single, shared inquiry. That split erodes trust and fuels speculation. So what would change the calculus? 2 things: corroboration and procedure. Corroboration would come from converging independent lines of evidence, consistent sonar signatures, sediment sampling showing human biological markers, artifact matching to missing person descriptions, or a credible witness linking the disposal to a specific time and actor. Procedure would involve a formalized plan that secures permits, uses appropriate environmental protections, and ensures that any recovered item is documented to legal standards. Only then can an agency elevate a civilian tip into formal evidence. The window for action is not infinite. Biological traces degrade, memories fade, and physical contexts evolve. Waiting indefinitely reduces the odds of a definitive outcome. Conversely, hasty action risks destroying what might be there. That tension, the need to act decisively, yet carefully, is the real friction behind the unanswered question, why hasn't anyone confirmed what the divers filmed? It is partly caution, partly capability, and partly the stubborn opacity of a natural environment that, by design, hides its secrets. Ultimately, skepticism keeps investigations honest. It prevents miscarriages of justice. But skepticism without movement becomes stagnation. The divers' footage and the items they documented merit conversion into a formal, methodical inquiry, a targeted rescan, scheduled during a seasonal low, using modern multi-beam sonar and ROV inspection, with immediate forensic protocols on hand. That is the only route from suspicion to certainty. Until then, the lake remains both the source of the question and the reason it remains unanswered. After 4 years of silence and the haunting images from beneath Fort Patrick Henry Lake, 3 scenarios remain standing. Each one leads to a different version of truth, and each one begins the same way, with something that should never have happened, and a choice made too quickly to undo. The first hypothesis, an accident, then a cover-up. In this version, tragedy begins not with intent, but with panic. Imagine a quiet afternoon in Beach Creek, no witnesses, no strangers, just a brief moment where something ordinary turns irreversible. Perhaps a fall, a blow, or a misstep that leaves a family frozen between disbelief and fear. Accidents involving small children often unfold in seconds. The aftermath unfolds in terror. People who face sudden, irreversible loss sometimes make catastrophic decisions in an attempt to regain control. If Summer's death were the result of an accident near her home, the subsequent hours would have been a storm of desperation. Calling authorities would mean scrutiny, exposure, the collapse of family life already strained by instability. In that panic, a simple, terrible plan could form: move the body, hide the truth, and pray for a miracle that would make it all disappear. Behavioral analysis supports the likelihood that in panic-driven concealments, individuals choose locations they can reach within 15 minutes. That radius from the Wells home covers both the Holston River and the Fort Patrick Henry shoreline. A pickup truck or SUV could transport a small, wrapped body in minutes under cover of darkness. The barrel, common on rural properties for fuel, waste, or storage, would provide an immediate, improvisational container. Filled with water, weighed down with stones, it would sink quickly. The plan would feel temporary, the kind of impulsive decision meant just for tonight. But fear has a way of hardening into permanence. From a psychological standpoint, accidents followed by concealment exhibit specific markers: hasty burial, minimal planning, and reliance on accessible materials. The items recorded by divers, the blanket, the barrel, the shovel, fit that pattern precisely. None are sophisticated. All are utilitarian. The intention isn't to outsmart investigators, but to survive the initial shock. What begins as concealment of a tragedy becomes a long-term deception maintained by silence and denial. The lake in this scenario functions as both tomb and alibi. Water offers instant distance. It makes the event feel separate from daily life. Once the body sinks, the family can tell themselves it is gone beyond reach. That psychological break, the belief that the event has been physically removed, allows them to continue outwardly as though life resumes. Many accidental death concealments end with partial confessions years later, often when guilt erodes the sense of safety that secrecy once provided. If this hypothesis were true, it would explain the contradiction between the absence of physical evidence on land and the concentration of anomalies underwater. It would also align with the recurring return of attention to the same area. The lake becomes a subconscious center of gravity for those connected to the event. Every time investigators or volunteers revisit Fort Patrick Henry, they unknowingly follow the same invisible logic, the pull of the one place where the story could end. The second hypothesis, intentional concealment, a domestic crime. The second scenario abandons the idea of accident and steps into darker territory, deliberate concealment following a deliberate act. This hypothesis assumes that what lies beneath the lake is not the product of panic, but of planning. The artifacts in the diver's footage, particularly the anchored blanket, the upright barrel, and the buried depression, suggest not improvisation but structure. Patterns from comparable cases reveal consistent behavior. When the perpetrator is someone within the victim's circle, the disposal site is often within a limited, emotional distance. They don't drive hundreds of miles, they choose somewhere that feels controllable. The method tends to combine familiarity with methodical effort, wrapping, waiting, and choosing an environment that mimics natural disappearance. Water again provides both symbolism and practicality. It swallows evidence and metaphorically cleanses the act. Under this theory, the barrel is central. A sealed container allows transportation without risk of exposure, and once submerged, ensures permanence. The discovery of a barrel at Fort Patrick Henry, with corrosion that seems to originate internally, aligns disturbingly well with that behavioral template. If the barrel was once sealed and later ruptured, its current emptiness does not absolve it. It hints at time's slow dismantling of intention. A family-based perpetrator would also explain the enduring inconsistencies in the case narrative, shifting timelines, vague alibis, public pleas that feel rehearsed. In similar domestic crimes, the story is not simply hidden but rewritten. The longer the rewrite continues, the more it consumes those maintaining it. The decision to choose a nearby lake over a remote burial site reflects a mix of fear and familiarity, fear of discovery, familiarity with the terrain. This scenario's credibility grows from small details rather than grand revelations. The white blanket wedged between rocks could signify transportation wrapping. The shovel indicates premeditated concealment, not reaction. The human-shaped depression suggests either failed burial or partial exposure before submersion. Together, they portray a controlled process rather than chaos. In profiling terms, such an act often involves what investigators call ritual of removal. Steps taken not just to hide evidence, but to symbolically erase the victim from the immediate environment. Water serves as an agent of removal that feels permanent but emotionally safe. It carries the illusion that the evidence will dissolve and the guilt will drift away. If this hypothesis proves accurate, Fort Patrick Henry would not merely be a dumping site, it would be the endpoint of a domestic narrative crafted to survive public scrutiny. The implications are heavy: a crime committed inside the sphere of trust, followed by years of performance to sustain innocence. In that light, the lake is not random, it's chosen precisely because it connects familiarity with oblivion. The third hypothesis, a broader pattern: the missing along the waterways. The third possibility looks beyond the Wells case itself and into the geography of eastern Tennessee. Within a 70-mile radius of Fort Patrick Henry, several unresolved disappearances share one feature: proximity to rivers, reservoirs, or artificial lakes. The names change: Sebastian Rogers, Lila Cavett, others lesser known, but the coordinates repeat the same theme: a body of water near rural access roads, just outside residential visibility. Such clustering may not signify a serial offender. It may simply reflect how geography shapes disappearance. Rural Tennessee is carved by water. Its valleys are lined with creeks that feed larger systems like the Holston and the Clinch, which in turn pour into reservoirs created by mid-century dams. Every town sits within minutes of a shoreline. When people vanish here, they vanish into water as often as into woods. Yet the consistency and concentration of these cases have prompted independent analysts to wonder whether something more deliberate connects them. Could there be a pattern of opportunistic disposal, a shared method among unrelated offenders who instinctively understand what water provides? The lake's remoteness, their depth, and the lack of constant patrol make them ideal for secrecy. They act as regional magnets for concealment, collecting not just physical remains but unsolved stories. In this context, Fort Patrick Henry becomes one point in a larger web. Each disappearance may differ in motive or circumstance, but they converge in environment: the comfort of water as eraser. This perspective doesn't accuse a single hand, but exposes a cultural geography of secrecy, a learned behavior passed through rumor and imitation. If, over time, residents whisper that nothing ever floats up in that lake, the myth itself becomes instruction. Analyzing crime clusters across similar topographies reveals how these informal lessons spread. Offenders don't necessarily coordinate, they copy. They read the same news reports, absorb the same local legends, and conclude that water is safety. This cultural mimicry creates a repeating pattern of aquatic disappearance that stretches from Kentucky to northern Georgia, each case echoing the one before it. Under that lens, the image of a small figure beneath Fort Patrick Henry Lake transforms from anomaly to symbol. It represents not only the possibility of one child's fate, but the recurring failure to fully confront how water interacts with crime in this region. Lakes here are treated as memorials, not crime scenes. The reluctance to drain, dredge, or resurvey them perpetuates the cycle. If this broader hypothesis holds, Summer's case might be the key that reframes an entire landscape of neglect. Her story, if traced back to the water, could force a revaluation of countless others, a systemic blind spot in how law enforcement treats lakes as limits rather than leads. Across all three hypotheses, accident, domestic concealment, or regional pattern, one theme persists: intentional or not, the lake is central. It is both physical and psychological boundary, dividing what can be known from what remains submerged. The barrel, the blanket, the depression, the shirt, these are not just objects, they are coordinates on a map of human behavior. Each theory asks a different question. The first asks why panic wins over confession. The second asks how love and fear can coexist in violence. The third asks whether the landscape itself has become an accomplice. Whether any of these paths leads directly to Summer Wells cannot yet be proven. But as long as anomalies rest beneath the water, the logic of concealment will continue to point downward. The lake has become the case's final witness, its silence louder than any statement ever given. The water of Fort Patrick Henry Lake looks ordinary to anyone passing by. Fishermen cast their lines from its banks, families take boats out on weekends, sunlight glints on its surface like polished glass. Yet beneath that calm lies an emotional gravity that no map can show. The same water that once reflected laughter and sky has become a mirror of absence. For those who know the story, every ripple feels heavy. It is impossible to stand on that shore without sensing that something unresolved waits below. Water has always been the most powerful metaphor in crime and in memory. It represents cleansing, concealment, transformation, sometimes all at once. It keeps secrets by changing them, reshaping what it hides until recognition fades. The lake at Fort Patrick Henry embodies that duality. It offers beauty to the eye and unease to the conscience. Every photograph of it carries a contradiction: serenity above, decay below. The contrast mirrors the case itself, outward normalcy concealing inner chaos. To analysts who study symbolism in unresolved crimes, bodies of water often function as collective mirrors. They absorb projections, fear, guilt, hope, denial. Communities pour their narratives into them when no other explanation fits. Over time, the physical place becomes psychological terrain. The search of the lake becomes a metaphor for the search of conscience. Whether or not a body lies there, something human always does, our need to believe that mysteries eventually surface. Fort Patrick Henry, once promoted as a weekend escape, now carries the weight of collective unease. Its shoreline has turned into a timeline, each returning diver or investigator marking another year of unanswered questions. Even those who don't believe the lake holds evidence still describe an instinctive chill while standing near it, as though it remembers what people would rather forget. That response is not superstition, it's the echo of empathy. Humans intuitively feel when a place becomes a grave of meaning. Beneath the algae and silt lies a language older than speech. Mud records what time erases: pressure, movement, absence. The depression found by divers, a hollow shaped vaguely like a body, may be geology or coincidence, but symbolically it is the perfect metaphor for loss. It is the outline of what's missing. It represents the case in negative space. For investigators, that image is a reminder that truth often exists only as an impression, something you can't hold, but can't deny either. The lake's stillness has become part of the investigation's narrative rhythm. News cycles flare when new tips emerge, then fade back into silence, like the water settling after a stone is thrown. Each disturbance reveals how little we truly see. Under sunlight, the surface dazzles, masking what lies below. Under moonlight, it turns black, absorbing all reflection. That changeability mirrors the shifting public perception of the case itself. Bursts of outrage followed by long stretches of quiet, as if the story breathes in tides. From a psychological standpoint, water resonates because it allows distance. It offers closure without confrontation. To imagine that evidence rests underwater is to imagine a form of peace, out of sight, out of pain. Yet that comfort is deceptive. What hides beneath water is never gone. It only waits for the right conditions to rise. Storms expose what still belongs to the living world. That is why the recurring searches feel ritualistic, almost like pilgrimages. Divers descend not only for answers, but to face the human need to see what we fear most: proof. In literature and myth, lakes are thresholds, gateways between what is known and what is lost. Narcissus saw his reflection and drowned in it. Ophelia floated away in flowers. In those stories, water doesn't kill, it reveals. It shows us our own obsession with the unseen. The Fort Patrick Henry Lake has, in its own way, become such a mirror. Each return of attention, the new dives, the renewed speculation, the repeated mention in news, confirms that people cannot look away. Something in us demands that the surface be broken, even if the truth underneath is unbearable. When locals describe the area now, they use words once reserved for sacred ground: quiet, heavy, untouchable. Fishermen avoid certain coves, swimmers feel uneasy where the current slows. These reactions illustrate how symbolism seeps into collective behavior. Once a place becomes tied to mystery, it changes how people move around it. Geography absorbs narrative. The shoreline becomes not just land, but a boundary between belief and doubt. From a broader human perspective, the lake speaks to our fear of hidden truths. We live in a culture obsessed with visibility, cameras, statements, social media. Yet some realities remain submerged because they challenge our sense of order. The unresolved disappearance of a child threatens that illusion. It exposes how fragile safety really is. The water, therefore, becomes both scapegoat and sanctuary, a place where unanswered questions can rest without resolution. For those closest to the case, Fort Patrick Henry is a paradox. It is both the site of potential evidence and the last space where hope still breathes. As long as no definitive proof emerges, imagination fills the void. Some envision innocence, others envision guilt. Both are forms of mourning. The lake gives physical shape to that uncertainty. It is wide enough to hold every theory, deep enough to swallow them whole. Perhaps that is why, even in silence, the lake continues to draw attention. Every time the water stirs, someone wonders if it's trying to speak. The phrase, "when the water talks," has circulated among followers of the case, a poetic shorthand for those brief moments when new information seems ready to rise, when the still surface trembles with possibility. In truth, water doesn't speak, it reflects. But reflection, in both senses, is how truth eventually surfaces. If the divers' discoveries prove nothing else, they reveal how deeply people need to believe that even buried truths can be found. The rusted barrel, the white fabric, the outline in the mud, these have become more than artifacts. They are modern relics, reminders that time and water cannot drown meaning completely. Each object is a syllable in the lake's unspoken language. Together, they form a story of concealment, consequence, and the enduring will to uncover what lies beneath. Ultimately, Fort Patrick Henry Lake stands as the perfect metaphor for the case itself, beautiful, inscrutable, and heavy with silence. It reflects not only what happened to a single child, but how entire communities wrestle with the unknown. The surface remains smooth, but beneath it, currents keep moving, shifting sediment, carrying fragments of the past toward light. One day, when conditions align, technology, timing, courage, the water may finally yield what it has guarded. Until then, it remains the quiet narrator of the story, telling us without words that the truth, like anything thrown into a lake, never truly disappears. It only waits for the right moment to rise. The passage of time has never erased a mystery, it only rearranges its shadows. In 2025, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released an age progression image of Summer Wells, what she might look like at 9 years old. The picture was meant to renew hope, to remind the world that a child is still missing, not gone. But to many who have followed the case, the release felt like both a memorial and a warning. When time passes without discovery, imagination takes the place of truth. The image on the poster may be brighter, older, more alive, but the silence beneath it has deepened. Meanwhile, outside the official statements and digital reconstructions, civilian teams continue to explore the places where the story first fractured. Their cameras return again and again to the cold green water of Fort Patrick Henry Lake. They are not conspiracy seekers or thrill chasers. They are ordinary people who refuse to accept that the story ended with a press release. While agencies release age projections, these divers record sediment patterns, sonar scans, and coordinates that no one has ever logged officially. They are not replacing the system, they are reminding it to keep moving. This divergence between official procedure and public persistence has defined the modern era of true crime. Agencies move within laws, citizens move within conscience. But sometimes conscience leads where law hesitates. The divers' findings may not meet the evidentiary threshold for courtroom proof, yet they meet something just as important, the threshold of probability. They show that the area closest to home, the lake that has always waited quietly on the periphery, still contains anomalies worth explaining. At this point, the central question has changed. It's no longer where is Summer Wells. It's have we searched deeply enough? That reframing matters. It shifts the weight of responsibility from mystery to method. The investigation must stop treating water as the end of possibility and start treating it as another form of terrain. Modern technology now allows precision that would have been impossible in 2021. 3D sonar imaging, magnetometry, remote-operated vehicles with manipulators capable of sifting sediment without disturbing biological trace. The tools exist. What's missing is the decision to use them. Revisiting Fort Patrick Henry Lake is not a surrender to rumor. It is a rational step built on the accumulation of patterns, behaviors, and partial findings. Each anomaly discovered by civilian divers forms a breadcrumb trail leading to a single imperative: verify. Verification is not sensational, it is scientific. It would involve remapping the lakebed, logging every depression and object within a set radius of previous coordinates, and cross-referencing the data against past dives. If the site is indeed clear, let it be proven clear. If it is not, let the truth finally rise from the silt. The cost of inaction is not just an unresolved case, it's the erosion of public faith in process. Every year that passes without visible effort teaches communities that certain questions are too uncomfortable to pursue. Yet the opposite is true. Justice is not comfort, it's confrontation. Going back to the lake would not just honor one missing child, it would reaffirm that even the hardest truths deserve daylight. Beyond the technical necessity lies something deeper, the moral geometry of closure. In a crime, or even the suspicion of one, water symbolizes unfinished business. Its surface hides, but its depth invites return. To look again is to admit that the first search might have been incomplete. It requires humility from institutions and courage from individuals. But humility is the cost of truth. Every detail that remains untested, every barrel, every depression, every sonar image dismissed as probably nothing, is a chance to correct the past. The divers' videos have already achieved one purpose. They have reignited public focus. The challenge now is to convert that focus into formal action. A coordinated operation involving law enforcement, forensic divers, and civilian specialists could eliminate uncertainty once and for all. If nothing is found, the rumor dies. If something is found, justice begins. Either outcome serves truth. Forensic history is filled with moments where renewed searches overturned assumptions. Entire cases have been solved years later because one area was re-examined with better tools. Lakes are patient. They preserve what the surface world forgets. Fort Patrick Henry may not hold summer wells, but it holds the last credible unanswered question in her story. To ignore it now is to accept ignorance as conclusion. The broader symbolism extends beyond one case. When a child disappears, the community becomes its own witness. Every person who remembers, shares, or asks, "What if?" participates in preserving the search. That collective memory is itself a form of resistance against oblivion. The lake, for all its silence, has become the anchor of that memory. Its very stillness forces the question to remain alive. In the end, reopening the lake is not only about solving a crime, it is about reclaiming moral balance. Every society measures itself by how it treats the missing. The difference between an unsolved mystery and an unresolved one is effort. One ends because it cannot be solved. The other lingers because it was never truly pursued to its limit. The Summer Wells case stands at that crossroads. To move forward, investigators should authorize a new phase, a comprehensive re-examination of Fort Patrick Henry Lake using state-of-the-art technology. Deploy multi-beam sonar to capture complete topography. Use underwater drones equipped with high-lumen cameras and 3D mapping to scan inaccessible sections. Collect sediment cores from anomalies for trace DNA or fiber analysis. Partner with forensic hydrologists to model how currents could have moved or concealed remains. Each of these steps transforms speculation into method. For the public, the call is simpler yet no less vital. Remember, keep asking the questions that bureaucracies avoid. Demand transparency about where and how searches were conducted. Support efforts that turn curiosity into accountability. The power of collective persistence is not noise, it's pressure, the kind that pushes institutions back into motion. Because beneath every unsolved case lies a single universal truth. Time doesn't erase evidence, it buries it, and buried things can be recovered. The lake waits, unchanged, its surface reflecting a sky that has witnessed 4 years of silence. Somewhere under that mirror lies either proof of tragedy or confirmation of emptiness. Both would bring peace. What the world cannot allow is for the question to sink with the next season's silt. It is time to go back, to measure, to map, to confront, to listen. The divers' flashlights once cut through the dark water for seconds. Now technology can illuminate it entirely. The difference between darkness and daylight is no longer capability, it's will. So the plea remains simple, almost whispered: reopen the search. Let science finish what fear began. Use every sonar beam, every drone, every inch of patience to find what has been hiding too long. If nothing else, give the lake the courtesy of a final answer. Because somewhere between what we see and what we refuse to face, the truth is still waiting to breathe. And the question we must finally ask is not whether Summer is out there, but whether we are brave enough to look for her where she might truly be.